Good morning. Welcome to Central Christian Church. The scripture this morning is taken from Numbers chapter 11, verse 1 through 25. When the people complained intensely in the Lord's hearing, the Lord heard and became angry. Then the Lord's fire burned them and consumed the edges of the camp. When the people cried out to Moses, Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire subsided. The name of the place was called Taberah, because the Lord's fire burned against them. The riffraff among them had a strong craving. Even the Israelites cried again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish we ate in Egypt for free, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. Now our lives are wasting away. There is nothing but manna in front of us." The manna was like coriander seed, and collard was like resin. The people would roam around and collect it and grind it with millstones or pound it in a mortar. And then they would boil it in pots and make it into cakes. It tastes like cakes baked in olive oil. When the dew fell into camp during the night, the manna would fall with it. Moses heard the people crying throughout their clans, each at tent's entrance. The Lord was outraged and Moses was upset. Moses said to the Lord, "Why have you treated your servant so badly? And why haven't I found favor in your eyes? For you have placed the burden of all these people on me. Did I conceive all these people? Did I give birth to them that they would say to me, 'Carry me at the breast as a nurse carries an unweaned child to the fertile land that you promised their ancestors?' Where am I to get meat for all these people? They're crying before me and saying, 'Give us meat so we can eat.' I can't bear this people on my own. They're too heavy for me. If you're going to treat me like this, please kill me. If I've found favor in your eyes, don't let me endure this wretched situation." The Lord said to Moses, "Gather before me 70 men from Israel's elders, whom you know as elders and officers of the people. Take them to the meeting tent and let them stand there with you. Then I'll descend and speak with you there. I'll take some of the Spirit that is on you and place it on them. Then they will carry the burden of the people with you so that you won't bear it alone. To the people you will say, 'Make yourselves holy for tomorrow, then you eat meat.' For you've cried in the Lord's hearing, 'Who will give us meat to eat? For it was better for us in Egypt.' The Lord will give you meat, and you will say, 'You won't eat just for 1 day, or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but for the whole month until it comes out of your nostrils and nauseates you.' You've rejected the Lord who's been with you, and you have cried before him, saying, 'Why did we leave Egypt?' Moses said, 'The people I'm with you, 6,000 on foot, and you're saying, I will give them meat, and they will eat for a month? Can flocks and herds be found and slaughtered for them? Or can all the fish in the sea be found and caught for them?' The Lord said to Moses, 'It is the Lord's power too weak? Now you will see whether my word will come true for you or not.' So Moses went out and told the people the Lord's word. He assembled 70 men from the people's elders and placed them around the tent. The Lord descended in a cloud, spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was on him and placed it on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but only this once."
We began our sermon series for this month in the book of Numbers. We began it last week talking about the Israelite people and the beginning of their journey into the wilderness. We're skipping over part of it, and the part that we're skipping talks about how God led them on this journey to the promised land. God led them during the day with a cloud, and then at night with fire. There are often times when I wish that God would lead me that way. GPS is not always wonderful. My favorite story is trying to find Mom's place here in Fairmont. The electricity went out, and my cousin and her husband were with me that weekend, and we were kind of in a panic. Well, I was in a panic about what I would feed them for breakfast, and so we took off, decided we would find an area in Fairmont that had food. Well, we went to Dutchman's Daughter, and they didn't serve breakfast at that time, if I can remember right. And so I put into the GPS Mom's place. Well, for whatever reason, and I tried to retrack this week and couldn't figure out how it took me. But for whatever reason, it took me south on 250 and left on Colfax Road, and then left on, I guess it's Mundell Ferry Road or Mundell Ferry Road, and we drove down that until we got to the river. Well, the car cannot jump the river. Apparently, GPS thinks that you can, but we turned around, we put it back in, and it sent us to Pinchgut Holler Road. Well, we got down that little narrow road and realized the creek on the left side was rising, which was the reason for the power failure in the first place. And then we got to a place where the electric wire was down on the road. So we had to maneuver around, and we finally got the car around, came back and decided we were going to Dutchman's Daughter. We were going to wait on lunch for them to open and forget breakfast, which is what ended up. It took me a year to find Mom's place. Well, I needed God as my GPS that day. It would have been much easier. I think God probably would have made us turn right on 250 instead of left to the freeway up, and we would have found Mom's place with no problem. But the children of Israel had God as their GPS. And so they're on their journey, and God is not only showing them where to go, but feeding them. He's showing them Mom's place. Well, not exactly. He's giving them the food, the manna. But the people began to grumble, and they went to the customer service department, which was Moses, and said, "We want different food. We are tired of this food." Well, how bad was the food? Apparently, it was so bad they wanted to go back to slavery, because in slavery in Egypt, they had all the food that they wanted, and it had great variety. How quickly we can forget the troubles before the slavery, but remember the pieces that are good. It's kind of that golden age kind of thing. Well, they wanted to go back to the golden age of slavery. Well, when I encounter problems, especially in groups, in organizations, although this works with individuals too, I use the systems thinking model. I had a class in this actually about, 15 or 20 years ago, and I found it very helpful. Well, it's the idea that with every problem, you see the point, and if you think of an iceberg, you see the top of the iceberg. But really, what is affecting the top of that iceberg is whatever is down below. It's the ocean currents around that iceberg that affect that iceberg. And of course, the ocean currents also affect the weather and everything else that happens to that iceberg. And we know the story of the Titanic, where they didn't see the iceberg underneath, and so it can cause that kind of devastation. And so it's the idea that for every complaint, all we see is the little tip. There's usually something much, much deeper. And so if we think of this model, the first thing that happens is we have an event. It's the event level. So say we wake up and we have a cold. We say, oh my gosh, can't go to work. I have this horrible cold. Well, then the second level is to think of a pattern. Well, lately I've had a lot of colds. Why have I had a lot of colds? Well, maybe it's because I'm not sleeping well. Maybe I'm not eating well either. So then you think of the structure level, and this has different phases that you can go through, but it's what's causing that pattern of not sleeping well and not eating well, which is causing the illness, the cold. Well, it could be stress. It could be that I couldn't find good, healthy, fresh food. And so you think through all of the factors that are involved in whatever that little problem is. And it could be things that are physical, like traffic lights, the terrain. There's a lot of things that hamper our way on our journey that cause us to have these problems. Could be lack of accessibility to healthy food. And then it can also be organizational. Maybe it's corporation laws or government laws or schools. We can see that in children who maybe don't have a good education, can't find a good job later in life, and it could be that they lacked access to school, to a good school that was very diverse, or lacked transportation to get to a place for school. And so the problem shows up later, but it was actually an organizational problem underneath. It could be laws, policies, regulations. There were regulations at one time that had signs in the South that said colored people water fountains, that those regulations that they had to have separate water. It's those kinds of things that affect the problem at the top, but we don't think about what exactly is happening at a deeper level. And it could be ritual. We have many habitual behaviors that are ingrained in us. They are not conscious. And if we go back to the cold model, it might be that the person with the cold that has the constant colds is because they're grabbing chips instead of carrots or pop instead of water. It's those subconscious decisions that we just make without thinking. And then there's the mental level. And this is where consciously we look at our attitudes, our beliefs, our morals, our expectations, our values. And these are usually subconscious learned kinds of things. We learn them from our families, we learn them from our society around, and we're often very unaware of them. Often these show up in generalizations. Things like, all poor people are lazy. We don't think that. We don't think we're walking through life thinking that. But if that's something that was ingrained in us growing up or for whatever, then that may be influencing how we do things. So if we evaluate why we caught a cold, these underlying beliefs, it might be that career is more important than taking care of ourselves. Our identity is caught up in that career, so we're not going to worry about how much stress we're going through because our identity is that career. Or thinking that healthy food is too expensive, too hard to cook, too hard to come by, and so we grab the chips instead of the healthy, fresh vegetables. Or it might be that we don't want to take a rest because rest is what is unmotivating. It's for the people who are lazy. It's those underlying kinds of things. And then if we can find those underlying causes, then we can affect transformation. So the Israelite people were wandering through the desert. God is leading them through, and they have an event. That event is that they don't like the food. They're tired of having the same meal at same food at every single meal. And so it causes them to react. And their complaint then to Moses is, we don't like the food. Well, and this I'm making up, but if they look at their pattern, they might think, well, the days we don't like the food are the days that we're having to walk the most and we're tired at the end of the day. And so it makes us not not tolerate the food. And so this is the anticipation level. And so they're anticipating that if they have another long day and they're really tired, that they probably will not like the food again. And then we come to the structure level, the level where we try to identify that iceberg. What is the underlying cause? Well, the underlying cause in their case may have been fear. They didn't want to be in that desert because they feared who might be around, who they might encounter in that dangerous place. Or maybe they feared Egypt. They left Egypt under horrible circumstances. They escaped, made Egypt mad because terrible things happened to the Egyptians when they were there. And Egypt was a huge military power at that time. So you make the giant mad back here, well, maybe that giant may come into the desert, and here we are out here wandering, eating this miserable food. Well, it also could have been a distrust of Moses. See, Moses was raised in the Egyptian princess's household. That made him an Egyptian prince, even though he had Hebrew parents. For those of you that don't know the story, Moses was born into a Hebrew family, but the government was going to kill the little baby boys, and so he was put by his mother into a basket and then saved by the Egyptian princess. So he was raised in that Egyptian household. And here are the Hebrew people, now known as Israelites, and they are following this Egyptian prince through the desert. And of course, eating the miserable food. Or it could have been disinterest. And I think that this is maybe one of the things that go on in our country. Let me explain. There's a rabbi's story that said that the rabbi had a dog, a hunting dog, and that hunting dog saw a rabbit one day. And so the rabbi's dog went running after that rabbit, and of course howling and barking and everything that a dog does. And other dogs heard it. And so the other dogs came along, and they were all howling and barking and running after that rabbit. But after a while, the other dogs just kind of faded away and quit running. But that rabbi's dog ran and ran and ran until it found the rabbit. It's the idea that the other dogs never saw the rabbit, so they gave up. So for the Israelite people, maybe it was that they weren't invested in this idea of a promised land. Oh, they'd heard about it. The stories had been handed down and down and down and down, but they'd never been there. It was 430 years later. It was just a story of the golden days, and it didn't mean anything to them during that time. Maybe they weren't willing to suffer for the cause of arriving in that promised land that was kind of that heaven or that place of glory that they might find. And I think we have this sometimes going on in the U.S. when we have the older generation that fought World War II, and I hear them saying, oh, these younger people don't know what it is to fight for a country and fight for freedom. And it's that, well, they weren't living through that. And so their ideas may be different, that difference in our environment. But then we get to the mental level, the level of transformation. So maybe the people can understand that it's really fear driving. It's not really the food. The food's really not that important. It's the fear. It's the distrust. It's the disinterest that is driving their complaint. And so they look at that and they might think, well, okay, that is a learned fear. Well, yes, they did live in slavery in Egypt, but they also heard the stories of their parents and their grandparents living within that slavery. And so they learned that fear of Egypt, and it built up. And they learned a distrust of all Egyptians. We do that commonly today. It's those generalizations. If we don't like one Egyptian, that means we don't like all Egyptians. And so Moses raised in an Egyptian home, we distrust Moses also, because all Egyptians are bad. And then, of course, the idea of the promised land, the golden age, and something that they might think is not attainable. And so how, when we realize those foundation problems, how do we then change our attitude or transform our life? So it says there was wailing at the tent doors. It went from private complaint within the home to public. And we know how that can go like wildfire. It puts the complaint front and center, and it can often then build and become bigger and bigger. And wailing often stops the singing and the praising. When we fail to see the joy and all we see is the yucky food, we begin to exist, not live. Well, we have unrest in the U.S. right now. There's arguments over COVID, the economy, whether we open up, whether we shut down, whether the schools open, or whether they do things virtually. We have an argument over illness, about the numbers, and about whether we ought to be shutting down or opening up. And then there's arguments about masks and all of this. And so we've got these tip of the iceberg problems going on. And often in the U.S., our remedy for frustration is to talk, which is why we have so many talk shows, and we have, if any news station, you can turn it on at any time and hear this dialogue about what is going wrong with our country and how it can be fixed. And it's talk, 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 talk. And I've always said, dialogue is good. We need to have dialogue. But the psychology department of the University of Missouri in Columbia, quite a few years ago, did a study, and it was a study on talking and whether it was good or whether it was bad. And they said, really, when we talk and talk and talk, do we really feel better at the end? Sometimes we do. I know in grief, it is a healing kind of thing. But often, especially with politics, we talk and talk and talk and talk, and we get angrier and angrier and angrier. It's not really a feel better kind of thing. And it can hamper progress. If the talking begins to validate all of our thoughts and there is no counter perspective, then it can begin to hamper solutions. It does aid in bonding with friends. You know, misery loves company. So the more we talk, the angrier we get, and the more people we gather around, the better we do feel sometimes. But it keeps us from finding those ways to solve. It keeps us in the frustration phase. And so I want to invite you this morning to enter the conversation about what is the underlying iceberg in the U.S.? What is causing our troubles within that we're seeing in all the things that are happening? And the protests also, I forgot to mention those. What are the underlying beliefs? What are the underlying feelings that are causing this to happen? I just very quickly thought maybe it's distrust of our leaders and maybe distrust of each other. But I am sure there are many, many more, and I invite you to think about that. But there is a possibility of having good complaints too. It might change the food. Now in this case, it did not. God said, oh, okay, you're going to have meat and you're going to eat it until you're sick. But it could change the food. It could make it better. It's always good if you can work with someone or work with groups with a complaint to make things better, to have conversation partners, dialogue, as I've always said. It helps to talk through worst case scenarios, to reimagine how life can be, to recreate how our life in our society could be. There has been great value in public complaint in our country. It ended slavery. It gave rights to women. It made our civil rights laws better. It gave protection for children. Many laws have worked on our environment. So there have been very good complaints in our country that made us a better society. So what were the underlying issues for the Israelites? They feared. I think they feared a lot of things in their lives. And I think they distrusted not only Moses, but maybe God. And so if we change the story and the people went directly to God, were honest about their fears, honest about their frustration, and maybe even honest with God about their distrust, then maybe things might have gone better. Maybe they might have found solutions for what was really going on in their lives to make their journey better and not to end up sick over too much meat, but moving with a better understanding of themselves and their society as a whole. And so I wonder in these times if maybe we might be a little more honest about our real fears, our real frustrations, if we might seek understanding, and if we might trust God, things might move in a better direction. This morning on our prayer list, we have many concerns as always. I think it's important to pray for all of our government officials right now as they're making decisions about schools and about our rules and regulations in life. We need to remember those who are ill, of course, our long prayer concern list, and those that were affected by the explosion in Beirut, Lebanon, if we think beyond our borders. But we also have a joy this morning. Jenny and Jesse Potter had a baby boy. It makes Jeff and Amy grandparents, so that's a wonderful joy. So let's go to God in prayer this morning. Amazing God, we admit our ignorance when we ask for your presence among us, knowing that you are always with us. Make us more aware that it is our responsibility to bring ourselves into your presence and to allow your guidance. May we be more attentive to you, giving you our affection, our care, our love, and not expecting anything in return. Make us sensitive, O God, to your voice, that we might rest in the peace that you freely give. Enable us to be weak and humble before you, that you might fill us with everlasting strength and courage and love. We come before you, O God, a mixed multitude. Some of us carry the burden of compromised health. There are some living in fear of this virus. There are others that are staying quarantined because of their compromised health, and they're feeling the pain of loneliness. There are those among us who mourn the loss of friends and family, and then there are those who mourn the loss of jobs and stability. And of course, we always have those who battle addiction and depression. We ask that you might return us to the wholeness that can only be found in you. May we bring our troubles directly to you rather than complaining on the street corner or finding others to be miserable with us. May we bring messages of faith and hope rather than fear and frustration. Enlighten us with your understanding. Strengthen us with your will and guide us in your ways. Bring us near to our neighbors that they might be brought near to you, and bring our neighbors near to us that we might also be brought near to you. And, O God, make us one with you and with one another. Remind us that nothing can separate us from your love. We pray these things in Christ's most holy name. Amen.